Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times, a Prancing Pony podcast production. I'm the Man of the West. Let's keep week 75 going with another Word Nerd Wednesday. Now, having introduced an entirely new segment yesterday, terribly tragic Túrin Tuesdays, I decided that it might be helpful if I used the Word Nerd Wednesdays in this series to look at some of the new names and words that we encounter in those readings. Today, then, we'll look at the names of the heroic brothers who made their last stand to protect Turgon and his people, Húrin and Huor. We'll also look at the name of the battle in which these events took place, the Nirnaeth Arnoediad. And finally, we'll break down the word nerdery behind one of my favorite phrases in all of Tolkien, Aure and Tuluva. And we're going to start with the brothers, and we'll actually begin with the little brother, Huor. He might have been the younger brother, but calling him little might have been a mistake. He was actually said to be the tallest of all the Edain other than his son, Tuor. And for the word nerdery on his name, we'll look first at the etymologies in the Lost Road. There we learn that Huor is a Noldorin name meaning heart vigor, courage, which certainly fits. But the etymologies were written in 1937-38, and Tolkien eventually changed his mind about the origins of his name. A footnote in the Shibboleth of Feanor, which is included in the Peoples of Middle-earth, explains that his name, along with the name of Tuor, was given in the language of that kindred of the Atani, but adapted to Sindarin, from which, in the main, the Adunaic language of Númenor was descended. Their explanation is not here attempted. Well, dang it, I wanted that explanation, but we're not going to get it. He and Húrin were of the house of Hador, sons of Galdor, the second lord of Dor-lomin. And we'll get to those names next week. Húrin was the heir of that lordship as the elder son, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at his name next. It's a Sindarin name, and in Sindarin it is never glossed. But in the etymologies, we learned that the first element, Huor, means readiness for action, vigor, fiery spirit. Now, I've not been able to find another word with that Huor element, or at least not one that isn't directly connected to Húrin. The second element, ind, means, in his case, heart. The definition is some particular purpose or intention of an individual, heart metaphorical, inner thought, meaning. It's the same element in Túrin's name, and it also appears in a name for Andreth, Silend, wise heart. But unlike Huor, who doesn't have any other names, Húrin has one famous epithet, Thalion. Thalion is translated for us in the Silmarillion directly as steadfast. It's simply the adjective Thalion, which means strong, dauntless. So he's got an adjective for his name. We see that same adjective in the epithet for Beleg Cuthalion, Beleg Strongbow. But Húrin, indirectly at least, gets one more name. Later in the story, Túrin will refer to himself as Agarwain, son of Umarth. Now that gets translated for us as blood-stained son of ill fate. So he's being called ill fate. Umarth contains the negative prefix u. That just negates the following word. And then Amarth, meaning fate. We know that word from Amon Amarth, Mount Doom. Now we get to the most paradoxical name, in that it is a beautiful name for an awful, terrible event, the Nirnaeth Arnoediad. If we look back at the history of the name of this battle, we learn that it has always been translated as unnumbered tears. But the Elvish form changed. Back in the earliest of the Lost Tales, that battle was called Ninen Udathriol. In the Lays of Beleriand, it was Ninen Unothradin, then Nirnaethos Unothradin, before it became, after another revision, Nirnaeth Ornoth. Later still, in the earliest Silmarillion drafts, it was Nirnaeth Dirnoth, and then a bit closer, Nirnaeth Arnediad, before he incorporated what he called an archaic form of that second element, Arnoediad. Now, Nirnaeth means tears or lamentation, and we see it in the Hauth en Nirnaeth, the mound of tears, but is itself a compound made up of Nir, meaning tear, and Naeth, meaning woe. Now, that ninth element we find in another name for the Nauglamir in the War of the Jewels, where it is called Sigil Elu Naeth, necklace of the woe of Thingol. So Nirnaeth isn't just tears, it's woe and tears. Now, the second word, Arnoediad, is the one that means unnumbered or without reckoning, from the elements ar, meaning without, and nedia, meaning to count. But in the etymologies, we learned that OE in Arnoediad is not the Sindarin diphthong OE, like I've been pronouncing it and probably will keep pronouncing it. It's actually the single umlaut vowel, the one that's got the O and E right next to each other. It's the open mid-front rounded vowel, U. Now, arnoidiad is an archaic form. I can't pronounce it as that. I'm going to keep calling it arnoidiad. It is an archaic form, so we actually don't see that really anywhere else. And now it's time to get to the best phrase ever, aure intuluva. Now, of course, it's translated for us directly in the text, day shall come again, but let's talk a little bit about that word nerdery. Aure is day, but it is specifically daytime as opposed to night. It's not day like a 24-hour period of time. Now, we don't see it in too many other places, but one of those places was earlier in this very chapter. For unsummoned and unlooked for, Turgon had opened the leaguer of Gondolin and was come with an army 10,000 strong, with bright mail and long swords and spears like a forest. Then, when Fingon heard afar the great trumpet of Turgon his brother, the shadow passed, and his heart was uplifted, and he shouted aloud, Utulian aure, aya eldalie ara tanatari, Utulian aure. The day has come. Behold, people of the Eldar and fathers of men, the day has come. And all those who heard his great voice echo in the hills answered, crying, Auta ilome, the night is passing. So that's aure, or daytime. But it's the entuluva that is a bit more interesting from a word nerd perspective. The verb itself is entul, and it means come again, right? The verb is made up of two elements. Tul means come, and the en prefix means again, just like our re prefix in English. And you might remember when I did word nerdery on Elendil's oath. Et eirello endorenna utulian, sinume maruvan arhildinyar ten ambarmetta, in the postscript to episode 324 on the Prancing Pony podcast, for the chapter The Steward and the King. Now there, utulian uses the tul element, but it's in the perfect first-person singular. I am doing this thing. The en suffix is what puts it in first person, while utulie is the perfect tense without reference to the person. Here, with this word entuluva, come again means you take the tul verb, add the en prefix, and the uva suffix is what puts in the future form. Day will return, as opposed to day is returning, for instance. And folks, that's it for today's Word Nerd Wednesday. Come back next week as we wander the wide, wild, wonderful world of words weekly on Wednesdays. And if there's a word you want to know more about, just let me know. Email barnabin@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, a bonus weekly episode, and more. And then join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Third Age Thursday. Podcast listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the TTT in your podcast apps. For those on YouTube, subscribe to this channel to get all the PPP productions, including, eventually, all the seasons of both the PPP and Rings of Power wrap-up, along with every episode of this show and my new streaming project, The PPP Plays. Be sure you're following @Prancing Pony Pod on Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and simply The Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook. And finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.